This is Professor L.B. Gayakawad's English Literature Wave. I am Professor L.B. Gayakawad talking on the topic the 16th and 17th century English literature and its development part 3. So we will see the first point, and the first point is prose developed in the 16th century. Prose means what? Prose means essay. Essay means what? The some essayists are there and they write some essays, that is called the prose or essays. So in this period there was the essay which was very developed, and so the prose written in the 16th century are classified between prose before 1579 and the prose in the latter half of the 16th century. It means that the prose of the 16th century was categorized, was classified, or was divided into the prose before 1579 and the prose in the latter half. Latter half means the latter, not latter means not before, that was latter. Latter means last, the latter half of the 16th century. And in this era Bacon was the main prose writer. Means Bacon was such a writer, or Bacon was such an essayist who wrote the essays which are really very talented, religious or philosophical, or very common essays for all. Then the next point is the development of novel in the 17th century. The development of the novel in the 17th century. The 17th century gave us the complex struggle. Means the 17th century novel gave us the complex period. Complex period means the period was very difficult period. Means the period means that period was complex, means it was not the easy period for society, and that's why this period is called the complex struggle of the king and the parliament. Means in this period there was the complex situation between the king and the parliament. Means the parliament and the king were against each other, and that's why this was the struggle, and this was a very difficult period or difficult struggle. It came to climax with the exile of Charles I in 1649. Means this struggle came to climax, means this struggle came very up, or this struggle came to height with the exilement of Charles I in 1649. Means in 1649 Charles I was exiled there, and with the exilement of this Charles I, this thing, or this struggle between the king and parliament came to a climax, or this was the biggest point in those days. It was the political and the religious struggle. Means just we saw that there was the struggle between the parliament and the king, and this struggle was a religious struggle and a political struggle, because the king was political, and the parliament was also political, but they were also giving importance to the religion, and they were also giving importance to the politics, and that's why this period was political as well as the religious. Elizabethan literature gave way to English novel. Just we have seen that there was the drama in the period of the Elizabeth Queen, And this Elizabethan literature gave a way to the English novel. Means the English novel became very developed, or this English novel became successful in the period of by the period of I will say by the period of Elizabeth Queen. Means in the period of Elizabeth Queen, I will say, there was the development of novel, or the novel developed because of the Elizabethan literature. Means the Elizabethan literature became very responsible to develop the novel. That is the explanation, I will say. The first professional novel there was Afra's novel. Means there was the professional writer, and that writer was Afra and John Bunyan. These were the writers in those days who were writing their novels, and this era became very successful with the novels of Afra and John Bunyan. For example, I will give you here Pilgrim's Progress. Pilgrim's Progress was the novel, or is the novel, which is today very famous novel, and it is prescribed for the syllabus of university also. Means John Bunyan wrote the Pilgrim's Progress, where there is the religious theme, and the total atmosphere is very heavenly atmosphere of this novel. So in this way the Elizabethan literature developed the novel, and the novel came to the development. That is the point here, with the example of the Pilgrim's Progress was famous in 1678. The sensational Afra, her literature was denied, and Daniel Defoe, Henry Fielding and Samuel Richardson came up as the novelist. What is the next point? Afra was writing her literature, but his literature was denied by people, or denied by the writers, and then the development came to the readers, and that development was in the form of Daniel Defoe, Henry Fielding and Samuel Richardson. Means these were the famous novelists who wrote their novels, and Afra was forgotten by people, or by the readers, by the critics, and these Daniel Defoe, Henry Fielding and Samuel Richardson came up as the novelist. Means this novel was developed by these three famous novelists. The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe was written in 1719. This was the famous novel which was written in 1719 by these poets. Means Robinson Crusoe was written by Daniel Defoe, and this was the famous novel. The Romance of Afra was rejected, and Servant's novel as exemplars was published. Again, there was the beautiful development in the 16th and 17th century English literature, and that was Afra literature again was rejected by readers, again was rejected by the critics or the writers or novelists, and Servant's novel as exemplars was published in those days. And then the novel Scarron's Roman Comic, this novel was appreciated in 1651, and in this way there was the period of the development of novel in the 17th century. Then the next point we are going to see is the point of the metaphysical poetry. The metaphysical poetry, when we discuss about Samuel Johnson. Samuel Johnson is there who has coined or who has described these metaphysical poets as the loose poets. Means according to Samuel Johnson, these metaphysical poets are the loose poets. Means he says that these are the metaphysical poets, means they are very loose poets, means they have written their poems very hard poems, they have used conceit in their poems, and that's why these poems have been very harder to understand for the readers, and that's why Samuel Johnson has described these poets as the metaphysical poets and the loose poets, or according to him this poetry was the loose poetry in the 17th century. The metaphysical poets use conceits, means these poets used the conceit type to write their poems. Means this was the conceit which was the way of writing their poems, and so this conceit was very difficult for readers, because they were not taking the image artistically, but they were taking any type of image, and that image was very I will say that image was very hard to understand. Means if there is the love point, they were not taking the image to show rose flower for love, but they were using the hand, or suppose they were using the watch, or suppose they were using the small hand of the watch, that is we can say means they were showing the time, or they were showing the abstract, or they were showing the absurd images to write their poems, and that's why these conceits were very difficult for the people to understand, and that's why Samuel Johnson has called these poems or this poetry as the poetry of loose poets, or he has called them the difficult poets or the metaphysical poets, because they use the medium of writing as the conceit, and that's why they were very difficult poets according to Samuel Johnson. They gave emphasis on spoken more than the words. Means these poets gave importance to the spoken things. Means they described only. Means they wrote many conceits, many things in their poems, but they did not use any kind of rhyme there, or they did not use any kind of meter there. Means they did not follow the rules of the poem there, and that's why these poets became very difficult for understanding, and so they are called the metaphysical poets by the famous critic, that is Samuel Johnson. Then the last point of the discussion is the religious poets. Now, the religious poets means the poets who have written on the life of the religion. Means they have studied the religion, means they were Puritan, I will say, or they were liking the religion, that's why they have written about the religion, and that is the point of the religious poets. So in this point we will see that John Donne wrote the religious poetry. Means there was the John Donne, who was the famous poet, or he was the leader of those poets, of the religious poets. And John Donne wrote the religious poetry as the metaphysical poet. John Donne was also the metaphysical poet, or John Donne is also the metaphysical poet. He wrote the religious poetry, and he was the famous, or he was the leader or leading poet. He was the leading poet of the metaphysical poetry. Means he was the main poet of that metaphysical poetry. He influenced George Herbert, Richard Crusoe, means this John Donne influenced George Herbert, Richard Crusoe, and these two poets wrote their poems very emotionally. They wrote their poems very emotionally and on the basis of fancy, because this John Donne was a fantastic poet. He was using the romantic scenes in his poems, or he was using the religious poetry in his poems, or religious themes in his poems, and that's why these two poets, means George Herbert and Richard Crusoe, also followed the poetry of John Donne, and they gave us the emotional themes and fancy. Then Henry Van's poem Silent Scintillant. This is the poem of Van, that is Henry Van, and Henry Van has written this famous poem by following John Donne, and he is also inspired by Herbert's Temple, means Herbert has written the poem Temple, and by this temple this poet Van has been influenced, and because of this influence he has written his beautiful poem, and this has happened only because of John Donne, and we can say that these were the holy poems, and in this way we can say that Vaughan is better than Herbert. Lastly, we will see that Vaughan is better than Herbert, means Herbert wrote his poems by following John Donne, and Vaughan wrote his poems by following Herbert, but Vaughan is better than Herbert. That is the point here. So in the last point we have seen that the religious poets were there, and those were John Donne, then I will say George Herbert, Richard Crusoe, and then Henry Vaughan, and then I will say Herbert, and finally we will say that Vaughan has been the better poet in comparison with the Herbert. So here we have finished today's third lecture, means third part of the question, and that question is English literature in the 16th and 17th century. Means our topic we have finished in 3 parts. Thank you very much.